All right. We had just pretty much finished up the historical background in terms of the Jews. We had been talking about Herod, and here we have a genealogy of Herod. And let me see if we can just look at this. If you would want to study, if you could go to somebody on this page and ask them about Herod's family, the key person here would be Herodias. Yeah, well, Herodias, right there. Um, Herodias was the granddaughter of Herod the Great. So, granddaughter here. She was the daughter of Aristobulus. And I don't know, let's see, Antipater, Mariamne. Herodias. Okay, here's Herodias over here, the daughter of Aristobulus. She was a sister of Agrippa I. She was the niece and wife of Herod Philip, who is over here. She is the niece and wife of Herod Antipas, who is here. She's the niece and mother-in-law and sister-in-law of Philip the Tetrarch. She is all of those things through the marriage of Salome and the marriage to, or Salome was her daughter, and then to the marriage of Herod Antipas. So she has all kinds of connections here. So if you wanted to find out about Herod's family, the person to go to would be Herodias, because she's involved with just about everybody. Now, Herod the Great had 10 wives. We only have 5 of them on here. He had executed his wife, Mariamne the First. We'll just cross her out. His mother-in-law, Alexandra. I don't see her on there. He had executed his son, Alexander, over here. He also had his son, Aristobulus, executed. His brother-in-law, Costobarus, he had executed. And his son, Antipater. I don't see him on there. Antipater, Herod's son, killed Phoreros. So his son got rid of Phoreros here with poison that was meant for Herod, but Pharos got a hold of it and died instead. Archelaus, who is here, divorced his wife Mariamne to marry Glaphyra. And I don't see her on there. The former wife of Alexander, the son of Mariamne the First. So Archelaus married the former wife of Alexander. Philip the Tetrarch married Salome, the daughter of Herodias. After his death, Salome married Aristobulus, her cousin, the son of Agrippa the First. We'll stop there. You can see what kind of family this was. In America, we would call it a soap opera, because everybody's marrying everybody else and getting rid of everybody else. And hold on just a second. Let me pull up the, okay, so I can see you all. In Acts 24, 24 and 25, it says, several days later, now this is Paul when he was in prison in Caesarea. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. And Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and judgment to come. Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." Now, Drusilla was Felix's wife. We have her down here on the lower left. She was the daughter of Agrippa the First and the sister of King Agrippa the Second, and the sister of Bernice. So Agrippa the Second is her brother, and Bernice is her sister. In Acts 25:13, it says, a few days later, again talking about Paul there, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus, who replaced Felix as the governor. And then in 25, 22, and 23, it says, then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear this man myself." He replied, "Tomorrow you will hear him." He's talking about the Apostle Paul. The next day, Agrippa II and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking officers and the leading men of the city at the command of Festus, and Paul was brought in. So here we have Agrippa II and Bernice. You'll see their brother and sister here. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." "I am not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I'm saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you not believe the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, this is Agrippa II, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" Paul replied, "Short time or long, I pray that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains." The king, Agrippa II, rose, and with him the governor and Bernice, and those sitting with them. They left the room, and while talking with one another, they said, "This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment." Agrippa II said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." Now, how many of you have read this passage before? You're familiar with this passage, okay? Probably most of you are. Now, Bernice married her uncle, Herod of Chalcis. So on our little sheet here, it's over lower left. That was her husband. After his death, then, he gets out of the way. She has an incestuous relationship with her brother, Agrippa II. So they are living together as husband and wife, even though they are brother and sister. Now, how many of you knew that when you read this passage? It just sort of makes it take on a little different flavor, doesn't it? When you learn about what is going on here. And I'm sure that Paul, when he was before them, knew what was going on. And he wanted them to become a Christian. And they were not persuaded. In the revolt against the Jews, or revolt of the Jews against the Romans, Agrippa II sided with the Romans. Bernice became the mistress of the Roman general Titus. Now, this is the Titus who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. He became her mistress. She became his mistress, and he sent her away. After he became emperor, she hoped for that relationship again. She went to Rome, and again, he sent her away. Agrippa II's death in AD 100 marked the end of the Herodian family. All right, do you have questions or comments here? If you think that family relationships are messed up today, all you have to do is go back and look at Herod's family, and you will see that it is nothing new.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Miles?
I'm just curious, or why Herod can afford to execute? Yeah, you said it's really full of chaos. Execute his sons, and is it for the sake of justice or merely being evil? And
go ahead.
Yeah, okay, another one after. Yes, please, doctor.
Okay, something that we're going to see in a lot of these rulers, we've already seen it in the Hasmoneans, is fear that somebody's going to take away their power. He was afraid of his sons. He was afraid of his wife. And he got rid of them in order that no one would take his throne.
Okay, good.
Okay, and what's the other question?
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Another one is that, is it by nature that men are polygamous? Sorry to say that.
That man is polygamous?
That's what they were saying. Maybe it's because it's the world, but from theological perspective, as in the Testament,
Well, it's not God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's not God's plan that that a man has more than one wife, or that a wife has more than one husband. In fact, Jesus taught against polygamy. Did you know that? He said
that to marry just one. Yeah.
Yeah, he said no man can serve two masters. Now, that's a joke. That's a
this
joke.
This is about mammon. You cannot serve both God and mammon, something like that.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. But when he said no man can serve two masters, he wasn't really talking about marriage. Okay, that was just a joke. Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, it is God's plan for one man to be married to one woman.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
But most of these kings, but most of these kings and leaders before had so many marriages, right?
That's right. That's right. They did, and it also happens today. Go to Africa, go to the Muslims. It happens today, but it's not God's plan. It is. It is something that I believe God allowed, but it's not His perfect plan for His children. Yeah.
Okay, so basically all these things is just shown in the Bible, just for us to see the difference of what is good and evil. Was it?
The Bible doesn't say that it was evil for, say, David to have several wives. He said it was evil for Solomon to marry foreign wives and with all his concubines. And that was roundly condemned in the Old Testament. But when we come to Jesus, you know, he tells us that it's God's plan for a man and a woman to be married, singular, a man and a woman, not plural.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll dig in more. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay, thanks. Mhm.
Any other questions, comments here? All right, let us go on. And let us just briefly look at the Roman emperors who served during the time of the New Testament. The first is Augustus. He was the first Roman emperor. He was the emperor during the birth of Jesus. He is the one who ordered the census, meaning that Jesus had to go, or that Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. His original name was Octavian. He was a wise ruler, and things prospered under his rulership. He revived the state religion, and he introduced the imperial cult, the worship of Rome as a state, into the provinces. He was worshiped as Lord and God, although he didn't demand that kind of worship. The next emperor is Tiberius, the stepson of Augustus, the son of Livia, his wife. But Augustus insisted that Tiberius divorce his wife, whom he loved, and marry Julia, Augustus's daughter. Tiberius was given to sexual perversion. He was very anti-Jewish, and as the years went by, he became very suspicious of those around him. Again, the paranoia that we've been seeing in so many rulers. He left the running of the empire to others, and for the last 10 years of his life, he lived on the Isle of Capri and didn't even go to Rome. Because of his paranoia, people breathed a sigh of relief when he died in AD 37. Tiberius was the emperor during the reign, or during the ministry of Jesus. It was his image that was on the coin that Jesus held, and when he said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. You know, he asked, whose image is on it? And the answer to that is Tiberius Caesar was the person whose image was on it. He was followed by Caligula, also called Gaius. He was very popular at the beginning of his reign, but he began to show signs of mental weakness. In fact, the only way he could be described is crazy. For example, he came to believe that he was the reincarnation of Zeus. He demanded to be worshiped as a god. This, of course, alienated the Jews. He did all kinds of crazy things, such as commanding his army to attack the sea to conquer Neptune, the god of the sea. Now, can you imagine ordering his troops to attack the sea, the ocean? He made his racehorse a member of the Senate. He commanded that his statue be erected in the temple of Jerusalem. Now, the Roman legate in Jerusalem postponed this very wisely, and it was never acted upon before Caligula died. So a crisis was averted. We have Claudius, Caligula's uncle. and he was made emperor when Caligula died. He had suffered a childhood illness which made him weak. Physically, he was not good, but he was a scholar and a good ruler. He turned the Roman Empire into a bureaucracy run by committees and secretaries. He determined to restore the ancient religion. The historian Suetonius said that he expelled the Jews from Rome because of some rioting instigated by a person named Chrestus. It isn't known whether Suetonius confused Chrestus with Christus, which is the Latin for Christ, and that the riots were Jews rioting against Christians there in Rome, or whether there was an actual person by the name of Chrestus who started these riots. At any rate, the Jews were expelled. Aquila and Priscilla, Paul's companions, were expelled from Rome at that time. Now, Claudius was the emperor during much of Paul's ministry. It appears that his wife Agrippina, who was also his niece, poisoned him, killed him, so that her 16-year-old son, Nero, could become the emperor. Nero ruled from 54 to 68. So when Claudius died, he inherited the throne. Agrippina attempted to really wield the power there, and Nero had her murdered. The first 5 years of Nero's reign were peaceful and successful because he was coached by his mother and the philosopher Seneca. But he had his mother murdered, and he had Seneca exiled. His extravagance depleted the public treasury, and he tried to replenish it with oppression and violence. In AD 64, a great fire broke out in Rome. Nero was suspected of deliberately setting it to make room for his new house called the Golden House, which was to cover 125 acres. That would be 51 hectares. In order to divert the blame from himself, he accused the Christians of setting it. Many Christians were arrested and tortured. This was the first persecution of the church by the Roman state. Tradition tells us that Nero had both Paul and Peter executed at this time. Up until this time, the church was viewed as a sect of Judaism. So it came under the protective umbrella of Judaism. But once the church was seen as something separate, then it was not protected as a Jewish sect, and the persecution came. The people of Rome finally revolted from Nero. Nero fled Rome and died at the hands of one of his companions at his request, rather than be captured. In AD 68, we have 3 people who served as emperor in short succession. There was Galba. He was only in office for a year before he was murdered. There was Otho, who ruled for only a short time. He was killed in battle. And there was Vitellius, who again only ruled for a short time. He was attacked by the Roman general Vespasian and killed. When he died, Vespasian then took his place. Vespasian was an old soldier. He was the one who was running the siege of Jerusalem. And he was frugal. He consolidated the gains of the Roman Empire. His son Titus then completed the siege of Jerusalem. Vespasian built the Roman Colosseum in AD 79. He then was followed by his son Titus. Although Titus's reign was short, he was one of the most popular of the Roman emperors. It is speculated that Domitian, his brother, had him murdered. And then we come to Domitian, who ruled from 81 to 96. When Titus died in 81, the Senate conferred the rulership upon his brother here, Domitian. In many ways, Domitian was a good and strong ruler, but he insisted on being called and worshiped as Lord and God. In AD 93, he executed some Christians for refusing to offer sacrifices to his image. Tradition says that this included his own nephew, Flavius Clemens. Now, many scholars believe that it was under Domitian's reign that the book of Revelation was written. Domitian in his later years became suspicious of those around him. Again, we have the paranoia. The Senate, as well as his family, were on pins and needles, wondering if they were going to be the next to be accused of a conspiracy. Finally, his family arranged to have him assassinated in AD 96. Now, in reviewing the Roman environment of the New Testament, we see that Jesus was born when Augustus was the Roman emperor. Jesus ministered and died when Tiberius was emperor. The great time of church expansion came during the reigns of Claudius and Nero. The Apocalypse or Revelation was probably written against the backdrop of Domitian's reign. All right, do you have questions or comments here? All right, so this is the historical background of the New Testament. So we need to look at the New Testament in light of what is going on here historically, where they had come from, where the Jews, the Christians had come from in terms of their history. And we need to set them in the proper historical setting when we read and study the New Testament. All right.
Hello, sir. Just want to ask,
Yes. Romer?
among your judgments, sir, among the Roman emperors, who among of them is the greatest? From your judgment.
Yeah, I think we would have to say the greatest was Augustus the first.
Okay, sir. And I'm thinking that Calcutta, if I'm not mistaken, Calcutta is the one who execute Pontius Pilate, right?
We don't really know what happened to Pilate. He just sort of disappears off the pages of history. So yeah, I don't think we can really
I
say.
read some article and it says that Calcutta is the one who ordered the execution of Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate killed himself.
I
But,
do.
I don't know.
I do believe that he ordered the execution, but I don't think that was ever carried out.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
No, sorry, not Calcutta, sorry. The Emperor Caligula. Calcutta is on my mind. Caligula, sorry, sir.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I would pronounce that Caligula, but
Caligula.
yeah. With these kinds of names, we're probably none of us pronouncing it right. If we could go back and actually hear the Latins, the people in that day, pronounce it, we'd all be wrong, I think. Same with the Greek.
Okay,
Uh,
sir.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Here we will go to the Jewish background. All right. Let's begin by looking at Jewish society. In Jewish society, there was less stratification than in pagan society at large. What we mean by stratification is high class, middle class, lower class, society being divided by classes. Now, the reason that there was less in the Jewish society was that the Jewish scriptures, our Old Testament, taught that all people were equal before God. They pleaded for the cause of the defenseless, the orphan, the widow, the alien, and they condemned oppression. So this had a leveling effect on Jewish society. Nevertheless, there was some stratification. The range of stratification goes from the ruling elite at the top to the destitute at the bottom. Now, the aristocracy was mainly made up of the priesthood and the leading rabbis. The Sanhedrin, the highest tribunal or law court of the Jews, was made up of influential people of society: the high priest, members of the priestly families, elders, that is, tribal and family heads, and the scribes, legal experts. The high priest was the president of the Sanhedrin. It was Caiaphas at the time of Jesus' ministry and Ananias at the time of Paul's. The family of the high priest and the elders were wealthy. Today, you can go to Jerusalem and you can see the ruins of the houses where the high priestly families and the elders lived, and they were mansions. The Pharisees that we read about in the New Testament were also from the upper strata of society. They were able to devote their entire lives to keeping the regulations of the Old Testament and the teaching of the rabbis. That's the Pharisees. They looked down on the common person, the Am Haaretz, it's called, the people of the land. Most of the people in Palestine in New Testament times were farmers, artisans, and small businessmen. In Palestine, 3 languages were spoken. The native language was Aramaic, and Jesus certainly spoke Aramaic. Hebrew was the language of the synagogue and the temple. The Jewish scriptures were almost totally in Hebrew, and some Israelites would have spoken it. Those who studied the scriptures would have. Jesus could very well have spoken Greek as well, since Greek was the trade language throughout most of the Roman Empire. In Jewish society, the family was very important, as in many non-Western societies today. The father of the extended family determined what the family did, including its religion. Here we need to say a word about our terminology. History of Israel refers to Israel before the Babylonian captivity, 586 BC. So before that, we just refer to the history of Israel. Judaism refers to the religion of the Jewish people from the Babylonian captivity until now. So after the captivity, we have Judaism. Ancient Judaism refers to Judaism from 500 BC to 500 AD. And this can be broken down into two parts. There is Second Temple Judaism, which goes from 500 BC, which is the Babylonian captivity, to 70 AD, the destruction of the Jewish temple. So most of our New Testament was written during the time of Second Temple Judaism. Then Rabbinic Judaism goes from AD 70 to the destruction, or that is the destruction of the Jewish temple, to AD 500. Medieval Judaism goes from around 500 AD to the Reformation or Renaissance. And then modern Judaism goes from the Reformation or Renaissance to the present. So in terms of terminology, this is the way we would describe Judaism. Everybody understand that? Questions, comments? All right. Of all the religions of the world, Judaism at the time of Jesus was unique. It was a national religion, and yet even when the Jews had no nation of their own, their religion persisted. Also, people from other ethnic and racial groups could join this national religion by becoming proselytes. The temple and its sacrifices played a central role in its religion, and yet in the absence of the temple, the religion persisted. Judaism was monotheistic, not as other religions which worshiped only one God, but with a denial of the very existence of other gods. Judaism did not make any visual representation of its God. No images, no pictures. That's why they were called atheists by the Greeks and Romans, because they didn't have an image that they worshiped. The Christian religion sprang from Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. All the apostles were Jews. The Jewish scriptures were the church's scriptures. In its infancy, the church in Jerusalem continued to meet in the temple. Christianity was seen as another sect of Judaism. It didn't occur to the primitive church in Jerusalem that a person would have to choose between Christianity and Judaism. They simply saw Jesus Christ as the fulfillment of the Old Testament promises. Now, later, their rejection by the Jewish hierarchy forced upon them to withdraw from Judaism. And the Gentile mission forced them to ask the question, must a pagan become a Jew in order to become a Christian? Now, when we see Jesus as the perfect sacrifice for sins, that is certainly going to have implications for the sacrifices done in the temple. So, but they saw themselves as continuing that line that started with Abraham, that they were completed Jews. To the end of his life, Paul considered himself to be a faithful Jew. Okay, the origin. The Jewish nation had its beginning with Abraham, the father of the nation. To Moses, God gave the covenant which regulated the religious and secular lives of the Jewish people. Throughout their history, from the time of Moses to the time of the exile, when Babylon took Jerusalem captive, the Jews vacillated, that is, they went back and forth in their loyalty to God. They had God's law, but at times they were not loyal to it. A major problem for the Jews was idolatry. And you who know the Old Testament, remember the stories of how they would wander from their worship of God, and then God would bring a judge, and the judge would bring them back. They would repent, they would serve God, and then they would go back to worshiping the Baals. And that was a continual pattern of the Jewish people until the captivity. But with the captivity, the exile, the Jewish religion was transformed, not in its essence, but in its adherence. Never again was idolatry an issue for the Jews. Did you ever notice that? Once the Jews go into exile, they never again have a problem with idolatry. The Jews had to decide once and for all what they would do. Either commit themselves totally to the worship of the one true God, or be absorbed by the surrounding nations to which they had been deported or fled, and lose their existence as the people who worship the one true God. So that was their choice. They chose the former. And this small national religion, which depended so much on the temple and placed such a great emphasis on the land, has now continued for 2,500 more years with neither temple nor land for most of that time. I had a college professor when I was in college who was an atheist. And I think his goal for the class, which was the history of Western civilization, was to convert all of his students to atheism. But he said there was one thing that really bothered him with his atheism, and that was the Jewish people. Because he said the Jews never should have continued to exist. They should have been wiped out. And he couldn't understand how the Jewish people could have remained a viable religion for all of this time. That was one thing that still had him puzzled in his atheism. He said that's the closest thing to a divine miracle that he had ever seen. Now, with the loss of the temple and the land, there came some new emphases. And we mentioned earlier the three pillars of Judaism: the study of the Torah, the law. It became prominent. The emphasis went from the public temple worship to private study of God's law. The scribe, who was an expert at the law, displaced in importance the priest who had served in the temple. There was also the synagogue. This became the new center of worship. Wherever 10 adult Jewish males could be found, a synagogue could be formed. In fact, we know of synagogues being in at least 150 different cities in the Roman Empire. We'll deal with the synagogue a little later on. And then rabbinism, that is the emergence of rabbis, teachers of the law. Now, two other aspects of Judaism came into prominence during this time. They were circumcision and the keeping of the Sabbath. Of course, the Jews had observed these ever since the giving of the law, but they took on special significance during this time when there was no temple that they could worship in. During the time in the New Testament, The boundary markers of Judaism were circumcision, Sabbath keeping, and food laws. Now, there's the question of, was Judaism at the time of Jesus and Paul legalistic? Was it a legalistic religion? That is, did people earn their way into heaven by doing the right things, by keeping the law? It's been a big point of debate for the last 40 years, ever since E.P. Sanders wrote his book entitled Paul and Palestinian Judaism. Up to that point, the point of Sanders, most scholars looked at the Judaism of the time of Jesus as being legalistic. Sanders said, no, Judaism was a religion of grace and forgiveness. And we will go to that into some length when we look at Paul. All right, let us take a break here. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we will come back after the break. All right. Do you have any questions or comments here before we get back into it? Okay. Let's look just briefly at the theology of Judaism at this time. We're not going to go into it to any extent. We'll only mention three basic beliefs of Judaism. N.T. Wright says that the entire theological worldview of Judaism of the first century can be summarized with these three beliefs. First of all, monotheism. This is the belief in one God. This is the most important and basic belief of the Jewish religion. This doesn't mean that the Jews only worshiped one God among many. It means that there is only one God. There are other beings, but there are no beings that are worthy to be called God. Every synagogue service began with the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4-9, which begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Many times in Isaiah, God says, "I am the Lord," or "I am God, and there is no other." So first of all, monotheism. Secondly, election. This is the belief that God chose Abraham and his descendants as his special people. Now, unfortunately, it was often looked at as a privilege rather than a responsibility. Rather than being a light to the Gentiles, they tended to be enemies of the Gentiles. So election. And then thirdly, eschatology. This is the belief that God has a plan for this world and that he is working that plan out in the present. There is a future for the people of God. Now, this was unique in the ancient Near East. In other cultures, time was viewed as cyclic in nature. Cycles simply repeated themselves endlessly. Of course, eschatology is very important in the New Testament. Jesus came fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament. The New Testament is a thoroughly eschatological book. So when we think in terms of eschatology, very often we'll think of the second coming of Christ, the tribulation, the millennium, who is the Antichrist, and that kind of thing. Well, that's only a very small portion of eschatology. the New Testament from beginning to end is an eschatological book. Wright summarizes the three beliefs of Judaism this way: there is one creator God who has chosen Israel to be his people, giving her his Torah and establishing her in his holy land. He will act for her and through her to reestablish his judgment and justice, his wisdom and his shalom throughout the world. Now let's look at the temple. The Jews had three temples, or some say two temples, in succession. First of all, we have Solomon's temple. It was built in 950 BC, in the 11th year of Solomon's reign. Solomon's temple was certainly spectacular. It was destroyed, however, in 586 BC. It's estimated that if Solomon's temple were built today, it would cost between 150 and 200 billion US dollars. That is the magnificence of Solomon's temple. And then we come to the Second Temple. The Second Temple was built after the return from exile between the years 537 and 516 BC. We know very little about this temple. Certainly in splendor, it was very much inferior to Solomon's temple. The Ark of the Covenant was taken or destroyed in the exile and had disappeared from the pages of history, Indiana Jones notwithstanding. Have all of you seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark? How many of you have seen it? 1, 2, 3. Well, that is a classic now in American films. So it's called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and according to it, the Ark is in a warehouse in Washington, D.C., but it's disappeared. So the Holy of Holies did not have the Ark in it during the Second Temple. This temple stood for almost 500 years, longer than either Solomon's temple or Herod's temple. The Second Temple was never violently destroyed. It was replaced section by section by Herod's temple. Herod's temple began, Herod the Great began reconstructing the temple in 19 or 20 BC. For a year and a half, the construction of the sanctuary itself went on, with the work being done by priests. The work of rebuilding the temple took many years. That is why the Jews could say to Jesus, "It has taken 46 years to build the temple, and are you going to raise it in 3 days?" So they were still in the process there of the reconstruction of the temple. The building must have been a spectacular sight to a person who was traveling to Jerusalem. It was made of white marble, partially covered by gold. By the time Herod had finished building the temple, it was the largest religious building in the world, 140,000 square meters. Philo said, "The buildings of it are of most exceeding beauty and magnificence, so as to be universal objects of admiration by all who behold them, and especially of all foreigners who travel to those parts, and who, comparing them with their own public edifices, marvel both at the beauty and sumptuousness of this one." When Paul went to Ephesus and he saw the temple of Artemis there, Diana, which was one of the 7 wonders of the world, I think he probably wasn't too impressed because he had seen the temple in Jerusalem, which probably far outdid the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Here's a visual comparison between Solomon's temple and Herod's temple. Look at the difference in the size. Herod's temple is huge compared to Solomon's. Now, the temple was made up of several sections. First of all, we have the court of the Gentiles. Anyone could go into that court. That was the large outer court. The temple proper was restricted to Jews. A sign has been discovered which hung in the temple. And this is the actual sign that is in the Israel Museum. It says, "No man of another nation to enter within the fence and enclosure round the temple. And whoever is caught will have himself to blame that his death ensues." In other words, you go in here, you die if you're not a Jew. This was also called the men's court. It was made up, first of all, the outer court of it was the women's court. And then we have the court of the Israelites. Within that, women were excluded. So anyone could go to the outer court. Any Jew could go into the outer court of the temple proper, and only men then could go into the court of the Israelites. Within that, there is the court of the priests. So only the priest could go there. Within that, we have the sanctuary, which was made up of the porch, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. The holy place was entered only by the priest and contained the table of showbread, the 7-branch lampstand, and the altar of incense. The Holy of Holies was entered once a year on the Day of Atonement by the high priest. Since the ark had been lost with the destruction of Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies was empty in the second temple. So here we have a little map of the temple. And this is the temple proper. This doesn't show all of the outer part. We have the women's court here, just to the right-hand side. And then if we go to the left through the doorway, we have the court of the Gentiles, the court of the Israelites, which would be where the men could go. And then inside that, we have the priest court, and only the priests could go in there. The structure then within that is the sanctuary, or the terminology here varies. This map calls it the temple. Some call it the sanctuary. Although, if you look at this, the sanctuary is what others would call the holy place. So this, what is often called the sanctuary, is made up of the porch, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. So in the Holy of Holies, that is the place where only the high priest could go one day a year. So if we go from the right to the left, on the outside, we have the court of the Gentiles, then the women's court, the men's court, the priest's court, and then in the sanctuary, the porch, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. So with each step here, we come to a more sacred space. the going all the way in to the Holy of Holies. What did the temple look like? Here is one person's depiction of it, what it might look like. This would be the way it would look, including the court of the Gentiles. And then as you go in to the other courts. Of course, that was on the Temple Mount, which we see here. Today, the Dome of the Rock, the mosque is there where the temple once stood. This is the Western Wall, or it's called the Wailing Wall by Gentiles. The wall here was part of the footing, the retaining wall of the temple. It is not actually part of Herod's temple itself. If you look at these blocks, you'll see that there's a place here where they change. From that line down, those blocks are part of Herod's retaining wall. The ones that go up from that are from later centuries. Jesus said that not one stone in the temple would remain on another. And that prophecy came true. The Romans did a good job of making sure that the temple was completely destroyed. So this is not the temple, it is the retaining wall. The coins that were used in the temple were the Tyrian half shekel. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the southeast corner of the temple as it looks today. And these steps on the left-hand side, this was the main entrance into the temple in Jesus' day. It is almost certain that Jesus walked on those very steps during his lifetime. So if you want to go to Israel and you want to go to the exact places that Jesus went, those steps there would be one of the places. They used the Tyrian half shekel in the temple. That was the only coin that they used. Now, let me just say that the reckoning of 3 temples is not universal. Many consider Herod's temple not as a 3rd temple, but as an extension of the 2nd temple. In fact, this period of Judaism, up to the destruction of the temple in AD 70, is called Second Temple Judaism. So Jesus was born and ministered. Paul was converted and ministered and died during the period called Second Temple Judaism. When we go to the later writings of the New Testament, such as John's writings, his gospel, his epistles, Revelation, maybe some of the other books as well, were written during Rabbinic Judaism, after Second Temple Judaism had ceased. Okay, do you have questions or comments here?
I have a question. Maybe it's
Yes,
not.
Gustavo.
Maybe it's not that important, but I'm just wondering. Can you point, if it's possible, where would be the place where Zachariah, father of John the Baptist, went to minister?
Yes. Okay, he would have ministered in the in this area where the sacrifices were made. Okay, so that's the area where he would have ministered. Yes, Bayan?
Yeah, so looking at the flow, if you were a Jewish man bringing a sacrifice for your family, you would enter through the gate beautiful with your sacrifice, go through the women's court, go through the court of the Israelites, go up the ramp to the altar. Your sacrifice would be accepted. I mean, hopefully by then would be accepted. It would be slaughtered. Then I see the slaughterhouse, uh, and then it's basically a one-way flow, just to keep them flowing. And if
Yes,
the
and
sacrifice was accepted,
yes, and
yeah.
I am not sure then where that person would go. He would obviously go back this direction um, after the sacrifice had
Yeah,
been made.
I was looking at a gate or a door near the salt chamber or the Parwan chamber or the chamber of the hearth. The gate of the flame, I don't know, offering gate maybe out that way.
Yes,
Because,
I'm not really sure.
yeah,
I don't know
interesting,
that.
really interesting. Yeah,
Yes, it
it's a
is.
lot of blood,
It is very fascinating. Now
a lot
that
of blood.
a lot of blood, yes. That
Yeah,
sign that
wow.
we saw that said if you
Yes,
go beyond this, you'll be killed, basically,
yes,
was right over in
yeah.
here. And there was a short wall right in this area
Uh-huh.
that they could not go
Wow.
past. Other questions or comments?
So the
Yeah,
supposed,
Ryan?
well, the supposed, yeah, real quick, the supposed prefab temple that the Jewish government has built, would it follow this pattern or the original Solomonic or Solomon's temple? I wonder. They supposedly it's all prefabricated, the labor and everything's ready. They're just waiting for the right time to move it and set it up.
Yeah, I know that there are
wonder.
Jews who are
Huh.
looking forward to a third temple, but I can't really say
Yes, sir.
what they envision. I would think it would be on the pattern of something like this. Yeah.
That's huge. That's
uh,
huge.
I have another
Gustavo?
question or comment.
Yes.
Looking to the blueprints here, it seems like the beauty gate is where the cripple was standing when Peter and John prayed for him, and so probably Jesus went through that gate several times during his ministry in
Yes.
Jerusalem.
Yes.
He could have seen that guy sitting there. But what is interesting also, that gate is what separates the Gentiles court from the women's court, right?
I believe so. Yes. This gate right here.
So crippled people were not allowed in the temple, in the proper temple, but they were allowed in the Gentiles court.
Yes. Yes.
And it's wow. So also is where they sell the animals and all this kind of stuff.
That's right. So
in the Gentiles court.
When Jesus cleansed the temple, it would have been in the Gentiles court.
Wow.
It would have been in here.
Yes. Can I say something, Doctor?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yes. Right. It is in the Gentile courts where they made it as like a marketplace that Jesus got angry in the crowd because basically, as I have encountered something that it is open to the Gentiles for the purpose that they will also hear the word of God. That this is for the purpose that the Jews will be the one who will minister to the Gentiles to, for them to know Jesus the truth. But it was not for that purpose for them. It is also for their own sake, for their own advancement. That in spite of that purpose, they are only making money rather than doing the work of the Lord. That's why.
I don't know if the Jews wanted to minister to the Gentiles there or not. I probably would be pretty skeptical about that. Actually, the cleansing of the temple probably happened up here in this colonnade because that is probably the place where the tables were set up. And this is very large. It doesn't look like it would probably be very large now, but it was really quite large with columns all up and down there. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yes,
Yes,
Katie?
Dr. Gallen.
Mhm.
What was the reason behind this? The Herod the Great to want to rebuild the Jewish temple. I mean, it's not his religion.
Well, he was never really accepted as a Jew. He did keep at least some of the laws of the Old Testament. He kept the Jewish food laws. You know, that's why they said it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son, because he wouldn't eat pork. So he did try, at least to some extent, to conform to the Jewish religion, although he was never accepted as a Jewish ruler by the Jews.
Okay, does that mean he just tried to get a sympathy from Jewish people?
That could be. That could be. Yeah. Yeah. But he was never accepted, and he was, you know, paranoid, thinking they're going to get rid of him.
Oh, all right. Got it. Thanks.
And Bayan, did you have a question?
Yeah, real quick, with the Tyrian half shekel, that was the temple tax coin also?
It was, yes.
Now, but it had images on it. So
It
yeah,
did.
it had images on it. So wasn't that kind of a like, okay, yeah. Wow. And has anyone equated how much that might be in today's money? I know it changes because our money changes.
I could figure that up.
Just a guess.
I'd have to look
I just
it
want
up.
to see how much they would have to.
Yeah, it's not a lot when you think of, you know, it's not a really large amount of money. But it is interesting that the Jews required that the temple tax be paid in Tyrian half shekels, which have images on them, which are offensive to the Jewish religion.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that strange?
There you go.
Now, it may be that they're using that because it's less offensive than the Greek or Roman coins. So, but yeah, that is interesting. All right, let us go on. Let's look at the synagogue for a few minutes. The synagogue became a key element in the preservation of Judaism. It was the social and educational center of Jewish life in the time of Christ. So in the left column here, we have the temple, and the right column, the synagogue. In the temple, the focus was on ritual sacrifice. In the synagogue, it's on the study of the law. The key person in the temple was the priest. The key person in the synagogue is the rabbi. The temple stresses the communal faith, and the synagogue stresses the individual life. In terms of their order of worship, this is basically the order of worship of the synagogue. It began with an invocation, a prayer for God's blessing on the service, a reading of a psalm as a call to worship, the quoting of the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and the reading of the 10 Commandments. There was the Barakot, the 18 benedictions, or the blessings, as it would be translated. Oh, excuse me. There was the reading of the scriptures, the sermon, and then a blessing, or it would be a prayer if there were no priest present there. If you look at this order of worship and compare it to that of the church, we see that there was an impact on the church by this. The synagogue had a tremendous influence upon the church. In fact, it has been said that Christian worship in its New Testament form was the result of the fusion of the synagogue and the upper room. the worship that the synagogue did, plus the Lord's Supper, was basically the form of the worship service in the early church. So the worship style of the synagogue, plus the sacramental experience of the upper room, we could say equals Christian worship. Of course, the style of worship in the synagogue wouldn't be exactly the same as Christian worship, because they worship Jesus as well as God the Father. And so, of course, there were differences, but there was that influence there. The Jews used two calendars simultaneously. They had the civil year and the cultic year, or we could call it the sacred year. And the sacred year was marked by major festivals. The civil year began in October with Rosh Hashanah, and the religious or cultic year began in the spring with Passover. You know, the same is true of the church today. Of course, we all have our civic calendars. We have January to December, but there is also the sacred year for the church. It begins 4 Sundays before Christmas with the season of Advent. And then there's the Christmas season, which is 12 days between Christmas Day and Epiphany. You know the song, "On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me," and then it goes all the way up to 12. Well, those are the 12 days of the Christmas season. And then it goes to ordinary time from Epiphany to Ash Wednesday. And then from Ash Wednesday to the evening before Easter, we have Lent, the season of Lent. And then we have the season of Easter, going from the evening before Easter Day to Pentecost, also called Whitsunday. And then we have ordinary time again from Pentecost to Advent. So the Christian church has a season, a sacred season, a sacred year, as well as the secular year, our January to December. Let me ask you, how many of you at your church celebrate the sacred year? Advent, Christmastide, Lent, Easter? Okay, yours does, Pierce? Okay, that's the only one I see saying that. In the Assemblies of God, traditionally, we do not celebrate the sacred year. The Anglican Church would, the Catholic Church would, and I'm sure that other mainline denominations would. We celebrate Christmas and we celebrate Easter, but then we also celebrate New Year's Day and other holidays.
Mm.
Throughout the year, there were 7 major festivals or feasts. For 3 of these, all male Jews were to be in Jerusalem: for Passover, for Pentecost, and for Tabernacles. Let's just briefly look at these. For Passover, this was the celebration of the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt. It was the most important of all the Jewish feasts. Our Easter falls in the Passover season. Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks. Pentecost gets its name because it takes place 50 days after Passover. Pentecosta, konta is the word there. It marks the completion of the barley harvest, and at times was called the Feast of Harvest, or the Day of First Fruits. It was a time of joy and thanksgiving for God's blessings. in intertestamental times, it came to be associated with the giving of the law at Sinai. And in fact, more people came to Jerusalem to celebrate Pentecost than the other two times, because the weather was better and travel was easier at Pentecost. We have the Feast of Trumpets, or the New Year, Rosh Hashanah. This was the Jewish civil New Year, a time of general rejoicing. We had the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was a holy, solemn day, the only day of the year when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies and offered sacrifices for the people. It was also the day that the scapegoat was driven into the desert, symbolically carrying away the people's sins. There was a famous baseball player who was a Jew by the name of Sandy Koufax back in the 1960s. And the World Series, the tournament to decide which was the best baseball team in the United States, was held during this time. And he was scheduled to pitch on the Day of Atonement, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't pitch on the Day of Atonement because, as a Jew, that was a holy day in which he would not do that. The Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, also called the Feast of Booths or the Festival of Ingathering. This feast served as a reminder of the Jews sojourning in the wilderness. At the feast, they lived in booths or huts made of the boughs of trees and palm branches. It also celebrated the close of harvest. The Feast of Lights, or Hanukkah, also called the Feast of Dedication. Of the 7 feasts, this is the only one that is intertestamental in origin. It was established in 164 BC when Judas Maccabeus recaptured and cleansed the temple after it had been defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes. It is celebrated at about the time of Christmas. Jesus celebrated Hanukkah, as we are told in John 10:22, the Feast of Dedication. And the Feast of Purim. The origin of this feast is recorded in Esther 9. It comes from the word meaning lots. It was a national holiday on which the book of Esther was read. So those are the major festivals of the Jewish religion. Do you have any questions here before we go on? All right. One thing that we need to look at is the idea of purity. To approach a holy God, one had to be holy and ritually clean. Now, every society has its standards of purity, and they differ from society to society. That's probably one of the things that makes living at a place like APTS most interesting, that people come with different standards. Now, when I grew up, my family taught me to wash my hands often. You would always wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, and if you could, before you ate. And that was just part of what you did. That was part of life. Now, not all Americans would hold to that, but that is the way I grew up. So what is acceptable and expected behavior? What about your society? How often should you bathe? One thing that we see at APTS is that is not uniform. Now, on the one hand, the Filipinos are always well groomed. You know, that I've never seen a Filipino slob, I don't think. You know, the hair combed, very nice. Other people come and they don't take baths very often. And all they have to do is walk in the room and you know it without ever seeing them because you can smell them. There's a clash then of what is acceptable. What kind of food is acceptable and unacceptable? What kind of dress is acceptable and unacceptable? Now, I've talked about this many times in this class before, and perhaps some people had a hard time understanding what I was talking about. But I think with the coming of COVID, that it takes on new meaning. Think of coming before God with COVID. You want to make sure that you come before God clean, ritually clean. Now, it's not physically, but it's ritually, ceremonially. And COVID has taught us to wash our hands often. We need to get rid of those viruses. We need to wear a mask. Of course, they didn't there in the New Testament times. But when the lepers had to distance themselves from society, it would be sort of like a person with COVID quarantining himself because that could spread to other people. Now, the Jews didn't distinguish between moral and ritual law. Now, we do, but they didn't. The same sacrifices for the moral law were for the ritual laws as well. For the Jews, some things were holy and some things were more common or profane. To approach a holy God, a person had to be ceremonially clean. Some things were clean, some things were unclean. The unclean could not be in the presence of God. When you read Leviticus, you see all of these laws about purification. When one is unclean, what does he have to do to become clean? There were clean and unclean foods. Eating food that had been not properly prepared and was kosher could make you unclean. Bodily discharges, that is liquids that come from your body, could make you unclean. Touching a dead person, a dead body, or a leper would make you unclean. Even touching a person who had touched a dead body would make you unclean. Eating with a Gentile or entering into a Gentile's house would make you unclean. It was like spiritual COVID. It could be transmitted to other people and make them unclean. So lepers, since they were unclean, had to separate themselves from other people. All right, our time is up. We will stop here and we will take up here next time. Before we check out here, does anybody have a question or comment? All right, we will stop here and we will see you next time. Have a wonderful weekend. God bless you.
Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
God bless you.
Thank you.